The treadmill at your gym and the lobster on your plate share a dark secret. 200 years ago, they were brutal prison tortures. But breaking the body was just the beginning. From leather masks designed to erase the human mind in total silence, to a horrifying 1920s discovery at the bottom of the Room of Forgetting. This is the dark history of the world's most insane prisons. Punished by luxury, the cockroaches of the sea. In the 1700s, before butter and lemon made it a delicacy, lobster was considered the cockroach of the sea. They were bottom-feeding trash, so plentiful in North America that they washed up on beaches in rotting piles 2 feet high. They were fed almost exclusively to pigs, slaves, and prisoners. But this wasn't a nice seafood dinner. The lobsters were often dead and rotting before they were even boiled, then mashed into a foul-smelling gray paste, shells, legs, guts, and all. The food was so universally hated that in the 18th century, indentured servants in Massachusetts actually took their masters to court and won a historic legal ruling stating they could not be forced to eat lobster more than 3 times a week. The prisoners were essentially eating ground-up sea bugs off dirty wooden plates, but feeding people unwanted sea trash was just a bizarre warm-up. Because when the justice system got tired of punishing people with bad food, they started inventing machines. Machines you might actually be paying to use right now. The fitness torture, dark origins of the treadmill. In 1818, an English engineer named Sir William Gibbet noticed that prisoners were standing around doing nothing. So he invented the penal treadmill, a massive, rotating wooden staircase. Prisoners were forced to climb these endless stairs for up to 10 hours a day in complete, agonizing silence. They were climbing the equivalent of 10,000 to 14,000 vertical feet every single day. That is like climbing halfway up Mount Everest every single day in a humid, dust-choked room while surviving on starvation rations. The famous writer Oscar Wilde was forced to walk this wheel of misery when he was imprisoned in Reading Jail in 1895. And if that wasn't enough, there was the crank, a metal box with a heavy handle inside the cell. The prisoner had to turn it exactly 10,000 times a day just to earn their meals. Inside the box was nothing but heavy sand or tight gears. If a prisoner was working too fast, a guard could secretly tighten a screw on the outside to make the handle impossibly heavy to turn. This is exactly why, even today, British and American inmates refer to prison guards as screws. Physical exhaustion on a machine was brutal, but at least you were on solid ground. What if the prison itself was slowly sinking, taking you down with it? The floating tombs, death ships of the Thames. By 1776, the American Revolution meant Britain could no longer ship its convicts across the Atlantic. The government's solution was the hoax. They took old, rotting warships, sawed off the masts, and anchored them in the muddy, fog-covered waters of the River Thames. Prisoners were stripped of their names, chained with 50 pounds of heavy iron, and packed into the dark, leaking bellies of the ships. The smell alone, a toxic mix of rotting wood, human waste, and unwashed bodies, was said to be noticeable from miles down the river. There was no fresh air, no light, and disease spread like wildfire. On notorious ships like the HMS Justitia, the death rate was an astonishing 30%. Cholera and typhus wiped out thousands. You couldn't escape because you were weighed down by metal and surrounded by freezing water. But while thousands died coughing in the dark water, the government realized a disturbing truth. Punishment only truly terrifies people if the public can actually watch it happen. The architecture of humiliation, iron gibbet cages. In 1752, the British government passed the Murder Act. Hanging someone was no longer enough. The state wanted the punishment to last long after the criminal was dead. Enter the gibbet. A gibbet was a human-shaped cage made of heavy iron bars. A local blacksmith would measure the criminal, sometimes while they were still alive in their cell, to build a cage that fit their exact body proportions. After the execution, the body was locked inside the iron suit and suspended from a tall wooden pole at a busy crossroads. This was the ultimate psychological terror. The cages were designed so the bones wouldn't fall to the ground as the body decayed over several years. As the wind blew, the heavy iron cages would swing and shriek loudly. In fact, locals frequently petitioned the government to take them down, not out of pity, but because the horrific creaking of the metal and the smell kept them awake at night, while birds of prey built nests in the rib cages of the condemned. When a famous criminal was gibbeted, local taverns would actually set up food stalls and sell tickets to tourists who came to stare at the swinging cage. This was the ultimate form of physical humiliation. But as the 19th century arrived, the system decided physical torture was outdated. They wanted to do something much worse. They wanted to break the human mind. The Masks of Madness, the Pennsylvania system. When the massive Eastern State Penitentiary opened in Pennsylvania in 1829, it operated on one terrifying rule: absolute, unbreakable silence. The goal was to make prisoners reflect on their sins and find God. Instead, they found madness. Prisoners were kept in solitary confinement for 23 hours a day. They were never allowed to see or speak to another human being. To make sure the silence was absolute, the guards even wore special soft-soled shoes to muffle their own footsteps. When inmates were briefly moved outside their cells, guards forced them to wear heavy leather hoods, masks of silence, with no eye holes, so they couldn't even make eye contact with the man walking next to them. When the famous author Charles Dickens visited the prison in 1842, he was deeply disturbed, writing that this psychological isolation was immeasurably worse than any torture of the body. The human brain cannot handle absolute nothingness. Men banged their heads against the stone walls until they bled, just to hear a sound. The Pennsylvania system proved that extreme isolation destroys the brain. But what if you took that isolation, stripped away the mask, and dropped a human being into a hole so tight they couldn't even sit down, and then simply forgot they existed? This brings us to the nightmare we promised at the start. The room of forgetting, the ultimate claustrophobia. If we want to find the most terrifying prison concept in history, we look at the oubliette. The word comes from the French verb oublier, which means to forget. An oubliette wasn't just a cell, it was a weapon. Built into the deep foundations of castles and early prisons, it was shaped like a bottle, narrow at the top, wider at the bottom. The only entrance was a tiny trapdoor high up in the ceiling. A prisoner was dropped down into the pitch-black darkness. It was so tight at the bottom that a grown man could not lie down, stand up straight, or stretch his legs. You were forced to sit cramped in total darkness, breathing stale air, sharing the tight space with rats, and sitting in your own filth. You weren't put there to serve a sentence. You were put there so the world above could lock the trapdoor and forget you existed. And if you think this is just ancient history, think again. When workers were cleaning out the oubliette at Leap Castle in Ireland in the 1920s, they found 3 cartloads of human bones at the bottom. And mixed in with those ancient skeletons were pocket watches dating to the 1840s. Long after the world had supposedly civilized, someone was still throwing living people into the dark, locking the door, and walking away forever.